Hey, everybody. It's an honor to be here during the week of Bob Dylan's 85th birthday. I'm proud to be speaking to you live from his home state of Minnesota. I've been a Bob Dylan fan since I was around 8 years old, so I've spent most of my life listening to his music and well over half of it traveling to concerts, talking to fellow fans, appreciating his talent, and trying to understand what it is about this artist that continues to fascinate people more than 6 decades into his career. I've written and spoken about Bob in a number of different places over the years, and you can check out some of those things by following these links. I co-authored Bob Dylan in Minnesota, where I examined how Minnesota has shaped and inspired Bob Dylan. That was a cool project because it brought together four of us who are all working to preserve Bob's legacy in Minnesota, and we shared some local stories and insights that you won't find in any other books. I also hosted the Bobcats, a Bob Dylan fan podcast, where I talked with fans about how Bob's music entered their lives and what it's meant to them. And it documented some unique, powerful stories. Online and in person attending shows, I've met so many interesting people who have made Bob Dylan such a big part of their lives. So I examined what was it about Bob and what is it about these people? What do they have in common and what leads to the level of devotion we have for this particular musician? During the pandemic, I finally had time to record some of those conversations, so you can listen to those on the podcast. And today I'll share with you some of my observations about those hardcore fans. Obviously, I'm a big Bob Dylan fan, and I'm a big fan of his music. But his music isn't really the main reason I enjoy talking about Bob. In fact, I think it would be just as interesting to me to talk about Bob Dylan as a cultural and historical figure, even if I didn't like his music. So I'll talk a bit about Bob's legacy as we celebrate his 85th birthday this week. I'm going to start with me, though, my own Bob Dylan story, and work my way towards that. And then at the end, we'll have some Bob conversation, which is my very favorite type of conversation. So please take note of anything you want to discuss along the way, and we can talk about that at the end. I remember it was a summer day in 1990 or 1991 when my older brother told me that there was a guy that sings like this. And it didn't really make any sense to me at the time. I remember thinking, why would someone sing like that? Does he sing like that on purpose? And if he does, why is he a famous singer? People must like the way he sings. So my brother played Bob Dylan's greatest hits for me, and it turned out that I did like him and I did like his singing. And I began listening to it every night as I went to sleep. And it made me pay attention in a way that no music had ever made me pay attention before. I was just captivated by it, and it just demanded my attention. I can remember looking up at the ceiling in the darkness and listening to him sing, "Take me disappearing through the smoke rings of my mind, down the foggy ruins of time," and thinking, where is this coming from? Another person made this up? It seemed like it came from a different planet than anything I'd ever heard any person say or sing before. And it was so far advanced from the rock and roll oldies of the 50s and early 60s that I grew up listening to. One of the great things about Bob's music is that it's so multifaceted and that at different points in your life, you can appreciate different aspects of it, and it can inspire you in different ways. When I was growing up in the 90s in a small town in Iowa, I didn't really have any reason to pay attention to what was going on in the outside world. Bob's songs were my gateway to so many things that were out there that I hadn't been aware of. They were filled with so many references to historical events, people, and places that you had to do research just to get a sense of what he was talking about. Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot and Cain and Abel and Einstein disguised as Robin Hood. And the songs tackled universal themes like war, power, justice, mortality, and human emotion, but also culture, nature, and mythology. And they opened up my mind and fueled my curiosity and inspired me to learn more about the outside world. As I got older and learned more about who this guy was, I learned that he was there at that pivotal moment in history of which side are you on, laying out the facts about the situation in his songs and leaving it up to the listener to figure out which side we were on. That was helpful for a kid like me who didn't even know what the sides were. His songs spoke out against war, racism, and oppression. He gave voice to the countless accused, confused, and misused, the luckless, the abandoned, and forsaked. And that inspired me to be a more empathetic person, to always be on the side of people who are being treated unfairly, and to be outspoken when I see injustice in the world. Simply put, I like that his music mattered. It was about things that mattered. I was a teenager in the late 90s, which I consider to be a very lightweight time in popular music. Spice Girls, Barbie Girl, NSYNC, and 98 Degrees. Bob performed before Martin Luther King Jr. at the March on Washington. He was part of that history, inspiring people to fight for social change with music that seemed larger, more ambitious, and more enduring. And as an aside, aesthetically speaking, as I look at this photo, he's one of the only cultural figures that's left who became famous in black and white. And that almost creates the illusion that he goes back even further in history than he does. Of course, the big reason his music carries that timeless quality is that literary and poetic language that just isn't found in other music. And if you read chronicles, you get a sense of how he discovered all that stuff and how he incorporated it into his music. And he was really the first person to do that. And because those poetic lyrics were on pop records, they were accessible for an average kid like me growing up in the Midwest who never would have read a book of poems or a classic novel. Those early songs inspired my appreciation for the written word. And if it hadn't been for reading his lyrics at such a young age, I'm sure I never would have gone into journalism and I never would have started writing myself. I also like that he was different. He looked different, he sounded different, he sang songs that resonated with huge groups, but still managed to be an outsider, an individual, a rebel who did what he wanted to do and didn't try to please anybody or fit in. And that inspired me to embrace who I was and not care about fitting in at a tough time in life, those middle school years, early high school, when you're trying to discover your identity. And I wasn't that different or that cool, just to be clear, but he made being different seem cool and seem okay. And because he was so distinctive, I remember every time I heard or saw Bob Dylan as a little kid. And that's a phenomenon that I've seen over and over in my conversations with other fans. In 1998, I saw Bob perform at the Grammys on TV. It was a different time, a different media landscape before YouTube and iPhones, and you didn't have access to all the media that ever existed, and you couldn't Google Bob Dylan to learn more about him. So stumbling upon him on network TV when you'd only heard his name here and there was a big deal. And the first thing I noticed was that even the famous people in the crowd were impressed that Bob Dylan was there. There was this aura of reverence. And I remember thinking that the way he looked and sounded didn't follow any of the rules I knew about show business and how famous people were supposed to be. He in no way resembled the guy from the 60s I was familiar with, and he wasn't trying to. He wasn't trying to sound younger or look younger, and he wasn't relying on nostalgia to get approval. And subconsciously, I respected that. He came out and sang, "I'm walking through streets that are dead, walking with you in my head. My feet are so tired, my brain is so wired, and the clouds are weeping." It was just the polar opposite of all the music that I'd been exposed to in my life up to that point. And it was so evident that this music was real. It was deep, it was better, and it was for me. And this Bob Dylan had already been around for almost 30 years, and he had so much more music to discover and so many stories to tell. And he won Album of the Year for Time Out of Mind, which instantly validated my fandom. And then at the turn of the millennium, all the music publications were releasing their lists of the best songs and albums of the 20th century. And Bob Dylan was at the top of all of those lists. Why wasn't everybody talking about Bob Dylan all the time? I went to my first Bob Dylan concert when I was a junior in high school, 27 years ago. I wanted to see him perform just once before he retired. And now I've seen him just about every year since then, almost 60 times total. It was Bob's commitment to touring and building a new live audience that fed my budding fandom. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in a small town in Iowa, so it was rare to have the opportunity to see any big name musician. I soon discovered that Bob Dylan came close by on a regular basis and the tickets were affordable. So over the first couple years, I started traveling to shows all over the Midwest: Des Moines, Fargo, Sioux City, Sioux Falls, Omaha, Cedar Rapids, Kearney, Nebraska. I even interacted with Bob a couple times during that period. Following the tour, I started to understand why these shows were so important to his hardcore fans. That his music was about more than just the sound coming out of the speaker, that there was a magic to seeing it created live, and that the way Bob Dylan made music was special because of the way he re-engages with the songs every night. He doesn't reenact or recite them. He's playing the song the way he feels like playing it that day, and he's a different person with a different voice and a different band than the one that recorded those songs in the studio decades earlier. He brings his music to life, and you're seeing living history every time he steps on the stage and re-engages with it. And I think that approach provides a little bit of a hint into how he feels about his work. He doesn't view his songs as sacred literary texts. He views them as tools or ammunition that he can use. And that's why he's all right with changing the words around and the arrangements around. And he's willing to sell his catalog, because as long as he can sing and play those songs live, that's what he needs them for. Maybe even more important than the music for me was how following the tour helped liberate me both physically and mentally from the small town where I grew up. I was 18 and I had no real plan. I lived in a conservative, ultra-religious farming community with no intention of being a priest or a farmer or a conservative, and I had limited freedom and access to anything outside my hometown. Following the never-ending tour from town to town gave me an excuse to explore the world, or at least the Midwest anyway. And the shows were all general admission. So in every town, a few dozen people would spend the day camped out at the venue door, sharing stories. People who had completely different worldviews than the people I'd grown up with. And hearing their experiences and ideas inspired me to start thinking for myself and to start living on my own terms. Lots of people I grew up with had considered me weird for listening to this weird old guy who sang weird music. But now I knew that there were lots of other weird people out there like me. And again, this was before social media could bring people around the world together around a shared interest. So I was completely unaware that a traveling Bob Dylan subculture existed. It didn't take long for me to fit right in. In August of 2004, I slept in a parking lot in Rochester, Minnesota to be first in line for one of Bob's ballpark tour shows with Willie Nelson. Shortly after I arrived, a girl filled in directly behind me. As we waited for the show to start in the front row, I said, "So, have you ever been to a Bob Dylan concert before?" I was feeling like a bit of a veteran, having seen him maybe 10 times at that point and having traveled a few hours just to see him. The first thing she said to me was that she had traveled to Paris to see him last year. Wow, you win. So we chatted a bit more, and she wrote her email address on the back of my ticket. We met up again the next year and traveled around the Midwest going to Bob Dylan shows. And now we've been together and going to Bob Dylan shows together for over 20 years. And as I've noted before, as a pickup line, "So have you ever been to a Bob Dylan concert before?" only works in very specific circumstances. Now we have our own little army of Bob Dylan fans. We have 4 boys to take to Bob Dylan shows with us. And yeah, as you can see in the upper right, Calvin even went as Bob Dylan for Halloween one year. Meeting my wife is what has kept me in Minnesota, which is the reason I've been able to meet, interview, and become friends with many of Bob's old friends and gain new insights into his childhood and life that I shared in the book Bob Dylan in Minnesota. So that's my Bob Dylan story. And there are so many others. When I talked to guest Ed Newman on my podcast, he told me about the song "It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding." When I heard that song, I felt like I was not alone in the world. There's somebody out there that understands what's in my head and in my heart. Fans all have their own Bob Dylan story about a parent or a friend or a sibling who played a song or an album for them that blew their minds, or the moment they first heard his voice 50 years ago that they've never forgotten, or how Bob's music has inspired them to accomplish something significant in their lives. When I started seeing him over 25 years ago, I started having conversations with all these fans and hearing these amazing personal stories with people from really interesting backgrounds. People who should have had their own reality show, or at the very least been interviewed on a podcast. Unfortunately, reality shows and podcasts hadn't been invented yet. But I could see from the start the community that formed around Bob's never-ending tour was fascinating and encompassed people of all ages from all walks of life who came together, built a seemingly instant rapport, and bonded around the things that made them obsessed Bob Dylan fans. So it was really cool in 2015 when an interviewer asked Bob about his audience, and he seemed to observe the exact same thing. He was asked, "What are you seeing from the stage?" And he said, "Definitely not a sea of conformity. People I cannot categorize easily. I wouldn't say there is one type of fan. I see a guy dressed in a suit and tie next to a guy in blue jeans, another guy in a sport coat next to another guy wearing a t-shirt and cowboy boots. I see women sometimes in evening gowns, and I see punky looking girls, just all kinds of people. I can see that there's a difference in character, and it has nothing to do with age." So what are the common traits among this varied group of people who hear Bob Dylan's music and get hooked on it? Getting at that common ground is a big part of the conversations I've had with other fans of my podcast. So having reflected on this for quite a few years now, these are some of the things that I've observed. One is that, from my experience, Bob draws very empathetic people. His lyrics and the way he delivers them so passionately draws on that empathy, whether he's singing about a tragic figure like Emmett Till or Medgar Evers or Hattie Carroll, or he's the narrator in a song where he sings about feeling heartbroken or betrayed or treated unfairly. He makes the listener feel and care. And that's what people who become huge fans of his seem to prioritize in the music they listen to. I also find that there's an open-mindedness among his fans. There are obviously people who are willing to accept things that don't fit the conventional mold. They're curious and not swayed by trends. They're nonconformists. His music challenges them, and they accept that challenge. I also find that a lot of his fans have a creative spirit, often inspired in part by Bob's creativity to play their own music, make movies, paint, write, draw, make jewelry. This extends to the entertainment industry. Bob is a favorite of actors, comedians, directors, magicians, and of course, other musicians. I can only imagine how many millions of people he has inspired to try a harmonica or pick up an acoustic guitar. I also find the fans I know to be meticulous and attentive people. Bob's music is music that makes you think and rewards paying attention. So it resonates with people who can appreciate the nuances and the subtleties in the words in his singing. And because of that, it connects with people on a deeper level than most music that's listened to maybe more casually. That leads fans to become more invested in him and his music at a level you don't see with many other artists. And it's amazing to see the personal sacrifices that some of these people take to follow him around on tour for days, weeks, months, and even years in some cases. That obsessive aspect of Bob Dylan fandom presents itself differently in a lot of different people. And some people go all out in analyzing and researching every line in his lyrics, or reading or writing the thousands of books about him. I think only the Beatles have had more books written about them than Bob. Or some fans seek out everything he's ever recorded. Or our friend Bill Pagel collects his childhood homes and logs every single song he plays live and every single thing he utters on stage for over 30 years now. It's also worth noting that no musician's story is more tied to his fans. His very first success came from the power of his music to rally people together behind a common cause at marches and sit-ins and rallies. Some fans booed him for going electric at the Newport Folk Festival or for his religious sermons in the late 70s. One yelled at him and called him Judas famously at the Manchester Free Trade Hall in 1966. Some considered him a prophet and stalked him and forced him into a life of seclusion. Some recorded him and distributed the first rock and roll bootlegs, an obsession that led to an entire industry. Some wait outside of concerts for days at a time and follow him all over the world with varying levels of mental stability. So the obsessive level of fandom his music provokes is itself a part of the Bob Dylan story. And immersing myself in that world of Bob Dylan fandom has been a wonderful companion piece to experiencing the music. And it's cool to know that even when Bob's playing concerts on the other side of the world and we can't be there, we've always got friends who are at his show enjoying it and maybe even recording it for us. And the last thing I want to talk about a little bit is Bob's legacy. I said at the beginning, I talk about Bob to various different groups in different settings. And one of the groups I regularly present to is high school students who are taking either a history of rock and roll class or modern music class. And a lot of the students have no idea who Bob Dylan is. Some might recognize his name. A lot of them say that they have siblings named after him, but they don't know a lot. So I try to place Bob in historical context and talk about how many of the things that are part of popular culture now were influenced by Bob or can be traced back to him in some way. So by learning more about him, maybe they can better understand the music they enjoy and how it came to be the way it is, and maybe even come away with an understanding of what makes Bob Dylan an important figure in the history of popular music. Because ultimately, Bob's legacy is tied to what future generations know about him. So I'd like to think I'm doing my part along with Timothy Chalamet and some other people. So when I start the high school presentation, I highlight Bob's unique place in popular culture by framing him as the real most interesting man in the world. He's been everywhere. He's met everyone. He's influenced just about everyone in popular music in some way. And he's done everything he's done in his own creative style in a way that's rooted in tradition, but takes on its own unique direction. I almost think of him as like a Forrest Gump type figure that shows up at these random moments in history. Who else was at the March on Washington, We Are the World, Dharma and Greg sitcom, and a Victoria's Secret commercial? Like, you just never know where you're going to find Bob and what he's going to do next. So talking about his legacy, the first thing that allowed Bob to establish his own legacy and really have his own full creative control was being such a great lyricist. Because he wrote Blowin' in the Wind and A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall and a handful of other songs when he was 20, 21 years old, that really gave him free reign with Columbia to record whatever he wanted to record. And that's had a role in changing the game for every musician. Before that, producers and studio heads planned out recording sessions and albums and looked for performers that would be conventional enough to have mass appeal. There were distinctive stylists, but they still were controlled as to what they were going to perform to some extent. But because Bob came into the studio with his own songs and they realized that there was an audience for that, they were willing to let him come in and do his own thing, even though it didn't fit the mold. They realized it could still be commercially successful. So once he did that and they found out that the audience was interested in it, that helped open up the door to artistic freedom for musicians across the entire industry that remains wide open to this day. And it had at least a small role in influencing the Beatles. If you look at the kind of music they were doing before and after Bob, they became more personal and more experimental. And of course, he helped expand their minds in other ways as well. That freedom also allowed Bob himself to expand the canvas for all modern popular music. So not only did he help open the door, he went in and discovered whole new territory. Some people still only know the original narrative of his career, that he was a protest singer from the 60s. But he moved beyond that, and the things that came out of that are his legacy to all of popular music. The unwritten rules that he came along and destroyed. The unwritten rules about the language that could be used in a song, the topics that could be addressed, the voice the singer had to have, the narrative structure the song should follow, the genre the artist was confined to, and even the length of the songs themselves. He had a 6-minute hit single with Like a Rolling Stone in 1965. And those things were all out the window after that. When Bob was presented with the Nobel Prize in Literature, they credited him with creating new poetic expressions within the great American song tradition. And that really summarizes all those things. And the breaking down of these barriers is one of the things that makes him an inspiration to so many other creative artists that have come along since then. Another thing I touch on with the high school kids is Bob himself as an inspirational figure, someone who actually achieved you can do anything and put your mind to it. He started out in a small town in Minnesota, just like they did. He set out to achieve greatness in music, and he did it despite having no connections in the industry, no way to disseminate his music on his own, like artists do now, an unconventional voice, an unconventional look, rudimentary instrumental skills, living in northern Minnesota, and playing a style of music that at the time didn't have any commercial appeal. In the spring of 1959, no one in Hibbing, Minnesota would have taken billion-to-1 odds that just a few years later, Bobby Zimmerman would get a Columbia recording contract, become a star, be considered the voice of a generation, and within a decade, revolutionize 3 or 4 different genres of American popular music. Never mind go on to become a Nobel laureate. He went from being basically laughed off the stage in Hibbing to writing Blowin' in the Wind in just a little over 2 years. And that's totally a credit to his work ethic, ambition, and single-mindedness he had in pursuit of his dream. We've also seen Bob's work ethic on display through his recently released archives. His lyric papers show that his poetic words for most of his career haven't just popped into his head fully formed. He is a craftsman who works hard at his craft, making edit after edit to get his songs just right, just the way he wants them. And to me, that aspect of his work ethic is also inspiring. A podcast didn't go by where the guest didn't mention Bob's work ethic as something that they admire. It's also inspiring that he's made that music his way all along. He has followed his own artistic path, standing up for what he thought was right, and making the music he wanted to make no matter what the audience or critics said. Everything else aside, Bob Dylan's story is an amazing story. And thankfully, it didn't end in 1966. I think that's what a lot of movies and documentaries get wrong. That's where this story starts to get so much more interesting to me. What happens to a 60s legend that survives the 60s and faces expectations that he can never reach and is given a Lifetime Achievement Award when he's 49 years old, which was basically the industry thanking him and telling him to go sit down, you've done enough. But Bob has continued on and demonstrated a creative abundance, or on 60 Minutes, as he called it, his wellspring of creativity that is unrivaled in popular music. By doing so, he has transcended that original narrative of his career as a 60s folk singer and a rock and roll poet by continuing to mine his own creativity and make great music. He made a hit record in 1963, and he also made one in 2020, and he made them in every decade in between. No one else has done that. He's also stayed true to his calling by touring the globe and bringing music to the people and kids like me in the middle of nowhere in Iowa, and constantly tapping into his creativity in new ways, whether it's by embracing new writing processes, welding iron gates, painting, chronicling music history with his radio show, writing books, or writing historical fiction for his Patreon page. I think that's why people continue to be interested in Bob Dylan all these years later. Not because he represents the past, but because he continues to evolve and to remind people what art can be. It can challenge us, comfort us, make us feel less alone, deepen our curiosity, make us more empathetic. It can inspire us to expand our minds and experience the world. And as Bob has said, the highest purpose of art is to inspire. And Bob has done that for me and for millions of people. And that's an extraordinary legacy. And we're fortunate that he's still out there and he's still adding to it. Thank you. And we've got time for a Q&A if anyone has any questions or comments. First question: how is Dylan received by younger generations? Are new listeners still discovering him, or is he becoming more of a historical figure? I think both of those things are slowly happening. I think the Timothy Chalamet movie did give him a little bit more recognition in the teen and young adult segment. I can tell you, I expose the younger generation to Bob's music every single day in the kitchen and in the car. Um, and I think his music, some music might not lend itself to carrying on and resonating with future audiences. I think his music does have a timeless appeal that younger generations can get into it. I've seen it happen. So that's a good thing. And I'm doing my part to try to keep it going with the little kids that I have access to the ears of every single day. Another question: for someone who knows Bob Dylan's name but hasn't really listened to his music, where would you tell them to start? Oh, that's interesting. It's interesting when you have had all these conversations, how it goes for some people. Everybody kind of experiences Bob in their own sequence. Some people get Time Out of Mind or got it in the 90s and then went back and rediscovered his old stuff. Some people have been around the whole time and listened to him chronologically as his stuff comes out. I kind of bounced around all over the place. And so that kind of has an effect on how you experience him, I think. But if we were starting from scratch, I do think that probably younger audiences will find that his material from when he was in his 20s is what might resonate best with them when they're in their 20s. He was an idealistic kid. He wanted the world to be a better place. He never wanted to be the spokesperson for any movement, but he was certainly sympathetic to the feelings of the young people in the turbulent 60s. And he wrote beautiful love songs during that period and wrote with such poetic nuance. I think that's where I would start probably, is I would start that first sequence of evolution where he went from the young idealistic folk kid to the rock and roll poet in 65, 66. I think, and then if you like that, you're going to want to hear more. So that's where I would start. Oh, okay. So this person missed in the presentation. Does Bob Dylan still create music? Does he give concerts? He absolutely does. I'm seeing him in July, and I saw him twice this spring. Yeah, he said anytime it's come up in interviews that he sees touring as his career, as like a job. He does it because he can do it, and he thinks he's good at it, as he said in 1986. So yeah, he tours, and he's toured almost nonstop since the mid to late 80s, and he views that more as his job than he does making albums. He's also said in an interview, I only make records so that I have songs to play so that people will see me live. So really, his career, for him, the priority is performing for live audiences, and he tours all over the world, and he's touring across the United States this summer. And he's never really stopped touring other than the late 60s and early 70s. He toured in the 70s, he toured in the 80s, and every year since then. So that's the career he's chosen, and all of his heroes did the same thing. They played all the way until the end. So he's 85 now, and I think he'll keep doing it too. Oh, this is an interesting one. This person asks, why go to all the concerts? You know all the songs. What are you seeking? New experiences or emotions, maybe? Yeah, I think that's one of Bob's strengths as a live performer, is that he reconnects with the songs in a really authentic way every time he plays them. So you never feel like you're seeing him try to duplicate a recording that you could go listen to. You're seeing him tackle the song that day in the way he feels like it. So he phrases things differently. The arrangements change over time. So you never really feel like you're singing the same song. And I think his biggest fans, especially, are looking for the things that do change. We enjoy when he changes a lyric or changes an arrangement or a tempo or a key. And I think he does that to make it interesting for himself as well. But it also makes it interesting for the people that have seen him 10, 20, 30, 50, 500 times, is that he does change things, even within the same songs. They're constantly evolving. And I think there is a community aspect to it as well, being there with other people that love it as much as you do and experiencing it together. I think it's a great thing. It's one of my favorite things to do. Oh, do I play music myself or write music? No, I don't at all. I think some people assume I do because I like his music so much. I think I only like Bob Dylan as much as and appreciate him as much as everyone should. I have friends that probably collect more recordings, and then probably that I know I have friends that go to more concerts, travel more to see him. I'm not really able to because I have 4 kids at home. I see him when I can within reason. Um, but no, I don't play anything. I'm an appreciator, and that's that's about it. Is there a Bob Dylan trail in Minnesota, places you can visit to understand where he came from? Yes, there is. I've given the tour a few times, and the Bob Dylan in Minnesota book really is a guidebook at its heart. We've got a maps in it of the Twin Cities and of Duluth and of his hometown of Hibbing. So if you are interested in going and walking the streets he walked and going and seeing the house he grew up in, or where he went to school, or where he watched Buddy Holly perform, or where he saw Gorgeous George at the Hibbing uh, Armory or the Hibbing Memorial Building in Hibbing, like those are places you can still go and walk the halls and Hibbing High School and see the theater where he performed many times during high school. And it's really a powerful experience for me. It was to see that somebody with such creativity and so much ambition came from such a humble beginning, and that he was empowered by his family and supported by teachers and encouraged all along the way to chase that dream and to make his dreams come true, all the way from Hibbing to the entire world. So I would encourage you, if you're a Dylan fan and you've got the ability to come to Minnesota, I think you buy your Bob Dylan in Minnesota guidebook and check it out. You've seen Dylan in concert 60 times. How did live performances change over the years? And was there one show that stood out above the rest? And can I watch it online on YouTube maybe? Yeah, that's one of the great things about the modern era. And one of the things that really like accelerated my fandom was having that amazing experience of seeing him live and then finding out that I can get the recording of that show from 2001 and listen to it at home and in my car over and over again. And the shows were so great then. That's really my favorite era were the shows I attended in 2000, 2001, 2002. The ones I would recommend would be Sioux City, Iowa from October 23rd of 2001. I would recommend Sun City, Arizona from April 8th, 2006. And I would recommend, for a recent one, I would recommend the Rough and Rowdy Ways tour opener in November of 2021. And great recordings of those exist on YouTube, and you can search them and find them and listen to them. His band has evolved, his sound has evolved, his instrumentation has evolved. When I first started seeing him, he played acoustic and electric guitar every single concert, center stage, and he played a lot more hits, and he played for a lot longer, played 2.5 hours, 22 songs, all on guitar. Now he plays maybe 16 songs, and he plays entirely on the keyboard, and he's played different types of pianos at different times. He's always searching for something new. He wants to change things up. I think he dreads the idea that he would go out and try to imitate himself for his whole life. He wants performances to be spontaneous and a little creative. He doesn't want to stick to what he's done already. He always wants to try something new. And of course, a lifelong smoker, his voice has changed a lot. I thought he was a great vocalist at the turn of the century. He's gotten raspier and his range has decreased over time as he's gotten older, but he's always, found a way to sing around it and experiment with it. And I think in the last 10 years, he's become an even better singer than he was before that. Um, so he wants to keep performing, and he finds a way to keep getting out there and keep doing it. And his voice in 2019 might be my single favorite voice he's ever used, and he's used a lot of them. Oh, this question. Is there a lesser known Dylan album that you wish more people knew about? That's a really tricky one because there are certain albums that the general public showed very little interest in. Whereas if you go to the fan communities online, they will, many people will tell you that Street Legal is their favorite album. And Street Legal is one of my favorite albums from 1978. I think that's an awesome album. And and so if you're a casual fan or a fan that hasn't heard much at all, um, you might like Street Legal. The voice might turn you off. It's hard to say. It just depends how much exposure you've had to different Dylan stuff. But I could tell you that my favorite album is Bringing It All Back Home. When he's making the transition from folk to electric, it's got some of each, and it's really got great acoustic songs, but at the same time, great rock songs. So I think that's the album that shows that transition, and I think he was really at the top of his game in that early part of 1965, late 1964. If I had to pick one album for a new person to see, like, is Bob Dylan up your alley? I would have them listening to Bring It All Back Home, probably. Any other questions, comments? Okay, here we go. Do you think there's perception that Bob Dylan's music is a business? For example, Roger Waters now is considered one of the richest rock musicians. Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. Is Bob's very much a capitalist, and he's very much like a really savvy businessman. He's entered different fields that have gained him a lot of money, and some people seem bothered by that. To me, it's his job, and he's really good at it. And if he wants to put his name behind a whiskey to make more money, or lend his songs to a commercial to get money for it, I don't. I'm not bothered by those types of things. But his music is definitely a business. I mean, um, he's marketed brilliantly. I mean, all the way back to the beginning. I mean, part of the reason he was signed was because the old Columbia Records suits wanted to find like a young kid that appealed to this like more like bohemian beat culture in Greenwich Village, and he was in the right place at the right time, and they marketed the heck out of him. The way Freewheelin' was marketed was brilliant, and all along he's had like the full power of a large record company machine behind him, and that's certainly helped him. But none of that would have mattered if he couldn't write brilliant songs. So I don't fault him for the fact that his music has become a business and he's made lots of money off of it. Do you know if Bob Dylan donates to charities or maybe his hometown and local communities? Yeah, he does donate to lots of different charities. I know he was an advocate for clean water. He had that "Hard Rain's Gonna Fall" commercial that that was for clean water. I mean, he's been involved in Live Aid and Farm Aid, um, and there's several others. Um, I have a list, but I don't have it on me at the moment. But yeah, he has donated lots of charities. All right. Well, unless there are no more questions, they seem to have stopped flowing for now. Thanks for tuning in. We'll give it another minute to see if anybody else wants to chime in. Thanks for coming and listening to me talk today. Yeah, I like talking about Bob. It's like my favorite topic. But a lot of people don't want to talk about Bob. So I think a lot of fans like me learned that lesson over the years, that you don't want to try to insert Bob into every conversation because a lot of people don't want to hear about it. I know my wife last week was sitting somewhere with an acquaintance, and the person mentioned that they were in town for their grandpa's 85th birthday, which was coming up on Sunday. And she immediately blurted out, like, Bob Dylan's birthday's coming up on Sunday. And that person was like, okay. Like, Bob Dylan isn't a center of conversation for everybody. So you have to remind yourself of that sometime. And I have moved enough. My light sensors have turned off, but we are wrapping up anyway. So thanks for coming, and yeah, reach out and to me if you're interested. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt_Steich. And if you aren't a big Bob Dylan fan, I encourage you to check it out and see if there's so many different Bob Dylans. There might be one that you like. Thank you.